In the introduction video, we highlighted the carbon footprint of a typical archaeology organisation. A large proportion of this footprint was allocated to overheads. So when we're talking about overheads, we mean non-project specific activities such as electricity and natural gas consumption, commuting, non-project related business travel, waste, water, fugitive emissions. And in environmental life cycle assessments, the concept of a cut-off is used to exclude minimal contributors to the carbon footprint. This methodology uses the 1% rule, meaning processes contributing less than 1% of the total footprint can be excluded. So, based on this 1% cut-off, we have excluded some greenhouse gas reporting categories based on the corporate carbon footprints from 2 of the largest FAME members. So, taking this into account, the tool only requires data for the following categories: buildings, commuting, and overhead business travel. So, as discussed in the introduction and also further in the person days video, overhead the emissions from the data input into this tab will be allocated to the projects based on person days. So if the person days input tab is not filled out, then the overhead emissions input here will not be included in any project calculations. So it's really important to ensure that the person days data is entered correctly and completely. So consistent with other tabs in the tool, we're using a data preference hierarchy to ensure best quality data. So we've got the red, amber, green. So option A is highlighted green and is the preferred option. Then we've got option B in amber and option C in red. This is the same for the other sections of this input tab. So you've got option A is green, B amber, and then for business travel, option A green and B and C here. So similar to the project transport tab, we have flowcharts to the right of the input tables, which will help you determine the best data resolution that you can provide. And as always, we want to avoid duplicating data by entering the same data in multiple formats. So if you choose to enter your measured carbon footprint here, we then do not want raw data, and we do not want you to ask to make an estimation for the office's emissions. So you just need to enter the data once. If duplicate data is detected, the tool will display a message to allow the user to confirm that these do indeed represent different activities and not the same one twice. So we have already discussed in an earlier video about project transport. So the overheads business travel down here is only for transport that cannot be directly attributed to a specific project. And so just ensure that you're not entering the same data on overheads and then entering it again on project transport. So now I can just run through the input tab. So start by entering your name and then whether it's a forecast or actual. Now we note here it's a little bit different to the other tabs, as you can only enter overheads data as at monthly resolution. So this aligns with the monthly person days input and ensures that the allocation methodology functions correctly. So you do not need to enter each month individually. You can enter for a whole year, but we just want to note, so the format here will be Jan 24 to Jan 25, for example, and we also want you to be aware that the start month is included and the end month is excluded. So if you want to do a full calendar year from January 24 to December 24, you must input Jan 24 to Jan 25. So why don't we do that? Jan 24 to Jan 25. let's do actual data. So moving on to buildings. So if we look at the flowchart, first ask, do you already calculate your carbon footprint for this element? So if so, then you can just input that here. These are the 4 categories that need to be included. If you do not have this, then do you have your monthly, quarterly, annual consumption available via actual meter readings? And these will be input here. If that's not possible, then estimated meter readings are good. And if you do not know your metered electricity consumption, then you can instruct the tool to make estimates using the bottom one here. So if we do office name, you only input one office into the tool, and it's Bristol Harbourside. So we can ask it to do an estimation. So I'm just going to talk through each one individually. So here you've got a measured locational based footprint in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So the difference between locational and market based. So locational is the carbon footprint, just the whole carbon footprint, whereas market based allows the renewable electricity purchasing to be considered. So if you purchase renewable electricity, then your electricity emissions will be equal to 0 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, whereas in the locational based, you still have to calculate it using the factors provided by DESNZ. So here you just are entering numeric inputs like 100, and then 80, and then 0. If you don't input anything in these, then it will just assume that the market is equal to the locational. Right. And then if you don't have this data available, then you can input your electricity consumption. So you use 20,000 kilowatt hours, or what's that, 200,000 and 30,000 kilowatt hours of natural gas. But if you don't have this the consumption available, then you can also instruct the tool to make an estimation. So let's estimate for both electricity and fossil fuels. So moving on to commuting. Here you have the option of inputting your surveyed or measured carbon footprint. So either for commuting, for home working, or for commuting and home working. Or if you don't have that available, then you can ask the tool to make an estimate. So here for commuting, you just say yes, and it's estimated based on the number of employees that are at all of your offices. And then for home working, you need to input your average work from home frequency, so the days of week on average that each employee works from home. So the commuting estimate is based on UK statistics and the number of employees, as I've already said, and home working is based on the number of hours worked at home by an employee if they're working X amount of days per week. So this can only be a number between 0 and 7, obviously, because there's only 7 days in a week. These you have to follow the drop down. Sorry, I don't think I explained what the estimate was for this. So if you're asking the tool to estimate your building consumption, it will take the information that you input in the office input. So here, it will take the 100 metres squared and find the industry standard benchmark for consumption per kilowatt hour consumption per metre squared per year for an office, open plan, naturally ventilated. And if it's all electric, then it will adjust for this, as it will, if it's all electric, it will generally have more consumption than an office that also uses natural gas. And it will also take into account the renewable electricity when calculating the market-based footprint. And then for the commuting, it will use the number of employees based at the office to make the estimate. So if I go back to the overheads input, and we move down to business travel, again, you can input your measured footprint, tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, or you can enter the mode of transport and the detail. So as I this table is very similar to the table in the project input, but I'll just briefly go over it again. Some of the options, the drop down in the detail depends on what mode of transport you selected, and some of them won't have a drop down as there's no further detail to be given. And additionally, so we've got an option B and an option C here. So if you enter a distance and a cost, it will only use the distance data to evaluate the carbon footprint. It will just remove the cost from the table and completely ignore it. If you're entering distance and cost for rail, say, and they do indeed represent different activities, then you'll need to enter it as a separate row. So let's just say bus, and let's just say 10 miles. So yeah, that's how the overheads work. We've sort of included this option A as if you're already carrying out carbon footprint exercises, then it doesn't make sense to have to input all the raw data again, as you'll just be doing the same thing twice, and we want to try and reduce the time required to fill out this tool, sort of make it as aligned with processes that already exist within your organisations as possible. So if we just add this in now, so as I said, the overheads data is done on monthly resolution. So we'll just talk about the duplicate data warning. So that's because I entered in option A, B and C for buildings. So it's just saying don't enter raw consumption data as well. And if the data represent different usage, then continue. And then here's an error because in the office input, we input that Bristol Harbourside is an all-electric office. And so we have tried to enter natural gas or fuel oil data for this office. And so if you get this error, then you either need to check whether there is fossil fuel consumption at the office. If there is, then you need to change it in the office input tab. If there isn't, then you need to remove the data that you're trying to input. So let's delete that and we can continue there. So yeah, it will be separated into monthly data when it's in the emissions database, as this allows the allocation to be done more easily. So that's why this tab takes a little bit longer to run, because it has to sort of divide each one by each data entry, in this case by 12, because we're reporting for 12 months. So again, we're getting the error of duplicate data because we're requesting an estimate as well as inputting data, and we've also requested an estimate for fossil fuel, so we need to change that. Perfect, so add that in there. So all of that data has been input. So for the overheads data, it's going to appear into two databases. So you've got your overheads database here, and you've also got your emissions database where it is here. So in the overheads database, the record number is indicated by a prefix OH for overhead. So this identifies it as an overhead entry. And then if we navigate to the emissions database, this just contains the raw data of what we have input. And then in the emissions database, you can see that the overhead number represents where this overhead emission, where the raw data is stored, and this contains the emission calculation. So for this we will have tons of carbon dioxide equivalent for each one. So yeah, as I previously mentioned, it's all at monthly resolution. So you can see here that in the overheads database we've got OH1M, which indicates the master entry. So this is the entry of the raw data that you input. So we know that we input 100 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent as the carbon footprint, and 80 and 10, 10 and 5. And so this is indicated by master, and then underneath this is split into the number of months that you try to input. So we input from January 24 to January 25, including Jan 24, excluding Jan 25. So that's 12 months in total. So the tool has split this master entry into 12 live entries. You can see them by the markers here, and these are all divided by 12. So if we highlight that, we can see that that sums up to 100, which is the figure that you input. So yeah, that's the same in the emissions database as well. You can see you've got 18M and then 18.1 to 12, and then if you look across to the side, master and live. So makes it a little bit more complicated when recalling data. So I will just do a demonstration. So when you recall overhead data, you need to recall it from the overheads database rather than the emissions database. So you want to put in this overhead number here. So let's just recall the first data entry. So if we recall, so if we just try to input 15, the record you have input does not start with OH, so you need to ensure that you're picking from the overheads database. What number did we say we wanted to do? Should we just do OH1? So then if we recall, and so say we did 3, then you say you need to recall the master input instead of the individual monthly entries. So that it must, if you have a hyphen, then it must be an M. Because if you input only 1 month, then it doesn't have the master because it doesn't need to be split up. But if you're recalling a split entry, then you must have hyphen M and recall just the master one. So OH1M. Why is it being amended? Let's just say wrong length of period. And let's say that we want to actually do it just for half a year. So July 24, let's put my name, and add it back in. So if we go to the overheads database, we can see that these are all amended, and then if we go to the bottom, we can see that it was an amendment of OH1, and that we've only got from the 1st of Jan to the 30th of June, so we've got January, Feb, March, April, May and June. So yes, that's the overheads input. I think that's everything.